on women's health, and we should stay true to our principles. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise because obviously we're talking a lot today, and really the eyes of our nation are looking at what Congress is doing because there is so much negotiation going on, and I am one who wants to have a long-term continuing resolution to the end of our fiscal year that makes the responsible budget cuts, that funds our troops, and gets us on to the next item of business, which is the one that we really must address, and that is the huge debt that is facing our country. That's what we should be doing. But we are now in the throes, and I'm told that there are serious negotiations going on that we hope still will have a result before the midnight deadline. But, Mr. President, if everything breaks down, I have a bill that now has 74 co-sponsors. 74 co-sponsors in the United States Senate out of 100. And that bill is very simple, and it says if everything else falls through, even though everyone that I'm talking to wants us to have that agreement that will not shut down government, that does fund our Army, our Navy, our Air Force, our Marines, our Coast Guard, all of those in the Transportation Security Administration, all of those personnel who are waiting to see if their financial lives are going to be disrupted. I want to make the deadline so it will not be. However, I do have a simple bill because there are some people who are not in the United States right now who are overseas protecting our freedom. They're serving in Iraq, they're serving in Afghanistan, their loved ones are mostly at home watching what's going on, and I've been looking at the comments of the wives of the personnel who are worried about what effect this is going to have on them because they've actually gotten notices that their pay is going to be cut, that it is going to be less than their full pay on the 15th because they're accommodating for a potential government shutdown. Mr. President, we cannot let that happen. We can't let it happen. I have introduced Senate Bill 724. We have 74 co-sponsors. Senator Inhofe, Senator Casey stepped up right from the beginning, and now we have 74 senators ready to assure that if things break down, that we will fix this problem. I have now, I have to say I'm moved, I'm very moved by a website that was created by one individual today, early this morning, I think, and her name is Hope Gwen Bradley. I didn't know her name earlier today when I spoke, but she just said, I'm going to do something. I'm one person and I'm going to do something. I don't know Ms. Bradley. I don't know if she has a connection to the military, but she opened a Facebook with the name of my bill, Ensuring Pay for Our Military Act of 2011. Mr. President, as of when I left the office to come to the floor, there were 906,412 people on this website who agreed with her that we must, at all costs, alleviate any fears of our military families when they are doing so much for our country and really fighting for what we are trying to do right here. So I want to commend Hope Gwen Bradley, and I surely hope I can meet her someday, for this kind of grassroots groundswell to support our troops with a simple bill that says if there is a government shutdown, our troops will be paid on time, full pay. That's what the bill does. 74 co-sponsors. We now have support, and I will say that Senator Rockefeller is here on the floor, my esteemed colleague, the chairman of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and I'm going to stop in just a minute because I'm sure that you are here for your time in morning business. But we now have the support of the Military Officers Association, which is 377,000 members who sent me a letter supporting Senate Bill 724. We have the earlier National Association of Uniformed Services with 180,000 members and supporters letter signed by Richard Jones, their legislative director, in support of this bill. And we have just received the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America letter saying they strongly support Senate Bill 724. And what they say in the letter is that this bill ensures that all members of the armed forces will continue to receive the pay and allowances they have earned despite any lack of interim or full-year appropriation. Our men and women in uniform protect our nation, continue to do so despite budget disagreements in Washington. The members of our armed forces are essential to the defense of our nation and must be treated as such. Many young service members and their families, and remember, so many of those over there are young. They are in their 20s, so they're not in the high level of compensation. And this is what they say, and this is the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. They know what they're talking about. They've been there. Many young service members and their families are dealing with multiple deployments and often live paycheck to paycheck. Military families should not be asked to bear further financial stress in addition to fighting the war on terrorism. This legislation protects the men and women who protect us. Signed, Paul Rieckhoff, the Executive Director of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. They're the ones who have most recently come back, and they are, too, coming forward and saying that we must do this. So, Mr. President, I'm for the bills that would come through. I think the House bill is a good bill. The one-week continuing resolution does take care of the military. But the chances of it passing here are probably nil. I think the other body having a clean continuing resolution, I support that too, but I don't think it's going to have a chance either. So the only thing that's going to have a chance is if we get a real agreement between Senator Reid, Speaker Boehner, and the White House that we can do a long-term continuing resolution that will truly fund our troops, that will have the necessary cuts to show that we're serious about this budget deficit and that we're going to correct the course of our country financially, and that's what we all really hope for. But if we don't get it, my bill, 724, with my 73 co-sponsors, our members are speaking in large numbers and saying this is the right thing to do. And, Mr. President, I hope that we can pass this bill as soon as it is clear that we're not going to have a real agreement. We can do no less. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Oh,
Mr. President.
Mr. President, could I just ask my distinguished friend and colleague to add Senator Feinstein to our bill as a co-sponsor?
Without objection, Senator from West Virginia is recognized.
It's quite an honor to speak with this presiding officer. I think I've not seen you there before, so I'll have to give a good speech. I'll probably have to give a little bit longer speech simply by virtue of your presence. Mr. President, I think most people who choose a career in public life do so because they have a genuine, huge feeling in their heart they want to help people. It's kind of simple. I know I've spent the better part of my career in West Virginia and in Congress looking for any way that I possibly could, succeeding in some, failing in some case is, but always trying to make life better for West Virginians, for the American people as a whole. Perhaps it is a simple idea, but I can say with some pride that over the years we've made a lot of strides. It's popular these days, I know, to beat up on the government. It always has been. That goes back to George Washington's time. But the truth is the government does an incredible amount to help people in their lives every single day. The benefits of government are not always visible. They don't usually make the evening news, but they are enormously important, and they make specific and large differences. This government looks after veterans. Otherwise, they wouldn't be looked after. Private sector wouldn't do it. And the private sector is sometimes very reluctant, actually, to participate in the helping of them. But when they come home from battle, the government is there with an expanded Veterans Administration system, superb medical health care to take care of them. It takes care of seniors with our Medicare and our Social Security programs. We have a Medicaid, and we have Children's Health Insurance Program, vastly important in a state like my own or anybody's, because they provide comprehensive health coverage to our most vulnerable populations, including children. And they do this, we pass this because it's morally right. It's the right thing to do, and in the best interest of our nation, to be sure that children get a decent start in life, in health care, maybe even before education, because the health care part starts really, really early with early tests. We help in the government build the roads, the bridges, and other infrastructure that connect small towns and communities and help make us a larger community. It's the fabric that links families and businesses all across this country. Federal agencies make sure that the food we eat is safe and that the water that we drink is clean. And they help communities pay for public safety and all kinds of law enforcement to help keep our streets safe. People don't generally know where money comes from, and that's pretty understandable. They just need to know if they're sitting out in an evening in a summer's night that the streets that they live on are being patrolled or being watched, etc. And I could go on and on. There are literally thousands of things that government has done over the years to improve the quality of life for every single man, woman, and child in this country. It is indisputable, and there's a glorious tale in all of that. But in recent weeks, we've seen the discussion about the role and the purpose of government take what seems to me a very nasty turn. Some of my colleagues on the other side have lately taken up the call to arms to do whatever it takes to slash, to close, shut down the government. We're faced with that. We may get that. They want to hold the American people hostage with a ransom note that keeps getting higher and higher every time negotiations go on. There's no question that we must get our growing deficit under control, and Democrats have taken responsible steps to do just that. In fact, we have made, in the larger scheme of things, we've gone 75 to 80% towards the Republican position. But at every turn, Republicans have blocked reasonable attempts to rein in government spending. What they want, they say they want to happen, but if there are reasonable attempts to do that, they stop it. Instead, they make unreasonable demands, and they change the goalposts on a repeated basis. Last December, Democrats produced an omnibus appropriations bill to fund the government for 2011 that would have reduced spending by $20 billion. A level endorsed by a bipartisan group of senators. Incoming Speaker John Boehner, however, launched a campaign to oppose that bill. Republicans ramped up their opposition in the bill and instead all we were able to pass was a short-term extension of funding for 2011, which was very frustrating. In February, Republicans offered a long-term proposal to fund the government through the end of fiscal year 2011 with $32 billion in cuts. But Tea Party Republicans, who are in control, rejected the $32 billion and instead insisted on deeper cuts of $61 billion that Republicans knew and openly admitted were both dangerous to the economy and totally unlikely to pass the Senate. In the meantime, Democrats have fought to keep our government operating. We have passed $10 billion in cuts since March. It's harder for Democrats to make cuts than for Republicans because we believe in doing things that help people directly and keep them safe. And, you know, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, who knows about that? Well, Senator Boxer does. I do. They make sure that our toys and other things that people use are safe. Somebody has to watch, always watching over what goes on. We've passed $10 billion in cuts since March and offered another $20 billion in cuts to the Republicans so that we can end this standoff and not shut down government. And just when we thought we'd finally reached an agreement on $33 billion in additional cuts below 2010 enacted levels, which is $73 billion below the President's 2011 budget proposal, not interesting, all these statistics, but profoundly important in the function and the possibilities of government. So this was at the end of March. Republicans then changed the rules again. They demanded $40 billion in cuts to appease the far right, the Tea Partyism, plus the far right. Some of my colleagues on the other side have lately taken up a call to arms to do whatever it takes to close the government. Now, despite a previous commitment from the Speaker, middle ground funding cuts of $33 billion are no longer good enough. Then, as the final bomb, they passed the seventh short-term spending measure that is loaded with $12 billion in spending cuts, which, by the way, is 6 times more than the agreed-upon rate of $2 billion a week, which includes the Department of Defense appropriations bill and all of those 66 riders that have absolutely no place on any appropriations bill. What is required here is less concern about the Tea Party messaging and total attention to the well-being of the American people and the health of our nation. The Tea Party cry delivered really in gleeful shouts and rants on the floor of the House, in the Senate, frequently in rallies outside of these buildings, is nothing like I've ever seen before. I've been here 25 years, something like that. I've never seen anything like it. And that they want to close the government down, and they love the theater of it. Just recently, we watched as an extremist crowd standing on the lawn outside waved flags with snakes on them and shouted, "Shut it down, shut it down, shut it down," kind of as if this is a sporting event, the Roman Colosseum. Let the gladiators compete. The heck with the people. Just let the Roman Senate take care of that. Well, even the leadership on the other side has joined in, with one Republican member telling the crowds, and everywhere, therefore, because it was televised, that he wants to see the government shut down. Just flat out said that. I believe they want that. I believe they want that. Oh, so really? So you have such disdain for our constitutional government, you so disrespect our fellow citizens, the people who sent us here and count on us to help and protect them, that you want a government shutdown. That's the deal, I guess. Has anyone else noticed that in many parts of the world today there are protests in the streets about basic freedoms? Here, where we are privileged already to enjoy these freedoms, yet we're stuck in the middle of a political debate with extreme positions and members of Congress who seem not to care what happens here, so long as they win or score points for the next election. The cynical thing to say happens to be true. Frankly, this cynical posturing from the other side has not only brought us to the brink of a government shutdown, only a few hours from now, perhaps, hope not. It's taken us to a point where we are forgetting what it is that we were arguing about in the first place. What should be a serious, thoughtful debate about finding reasonable ways to cut the budget and scale back our deficit has, for some, instead turned into a game. I say that because what we are hearing from the other side is that they want mostly to move an extreme agenda. They care about that. They have their markers. They have to meet those markers. No matter the effect on the people, they have to meet the markers. They ran, some of them without any intention, many of them without any intention of running again, so they can't be held accountable, so they can just sort of work on shutting down government, which they don't like for various reasons. So it's no longer about agreeing on a dollar figure to cut from the budget. It's about trying to turn the government into the bogeyman and close its doors. Let me tell you why I think that's unacceptable. It's because this is not a game at all. This is real life, and the decisions we make here have real-world implications for the people of West Virginia and every other state and all over the world. Let's consider what would happen if the extremist wing of the Republican Party gets its way and the government does, in fact, shut down. Soldiers would not get their paychecks if there is a shutdown, if we can't pass something. That's right. The servicemen and servicewomen who risk their lives so that we may leave in freedom might not get paid. And you can talk, well, maybe someday they will be repaid, but in the meantime, they're living week to week, and their families are, and they don't get paid. That doesn't sound like a sane policy. In my state of West Virginia, there are more than 6,500 people serving in the National Guard. Nationally, about half of the young men and women in the military are 25 years or younger, and about 40% of them have children. Many of the families are on one income, and some are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, they don't know what they're going to do. It's one more thing that they should not be thinking about. They should be thinking about surviving and carrying out their mission. The chair has indicated that I've gone on a little bit too long, so I'm going to beg for just 1.5 more pages. That being granted, I will proceed. There's so much more in the chopping block if the extremists in Congress get their way. The Federal Housing Administration wouldn't be able to process mortgage loans. Social Security claims would freeze. I'm not sure that Medicare could take in any new members. Several thousand people every day, qualify for Medicare. I'm not sure they could be taken in. We remember that during the 4 days of the 1995 shutdown, 112,000 claims for Social Security, retirement, and disability benefits were not taken. They were not received. They were not processed. They were not dealt with. And 800,000 callers were denied service on the Social Security Administration's phone. Mr. President, I'm going to sort of stop with that. I think you get the drift of my feeling and what I feel. But I don't consider it a game if the IRS would stop refunding checks. More than 235,000 West Virginians will file their taxes using paper forms this year. Computers are not all the rage in all parts of West Virginia, and so they will wait longer for their returns to be completed. And then I could go on with small business and National Institute of Health and all the rest of it. Federal mine safety inspection will shut down. The mines will continue to run, but there'll be no federal inspectors. I have respect for state inspectors, but I have a lot more respect for federal inspectors. mines operating with nobody inspecting. It's a horrifying thought. So I just hope that somehow this will come out to be a good result. There are reasons why it could be, and there are reasons both to be pessimistic and to be a little bit optimistic. I can't at this time call it either way, and I will cease my oration here, Mr. President, and ask that the balance of my statement be put in the record as if read.
Without objection, the balance of the Senator's statement will be put in the record as if read.
I thank the presiding officer. Yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
I rise to speak on the important issue of the day. Sometimes complex challenges present clear and compelling choices. Mr. President, that's the case with the fiscal challenge before us today. We have a choice between delay and disruption or progress and accord, and the nation's eyes are upon us. We need to vote to keep our government running, to pay our military, and at the same time take essential steps to tame our uncontrolled spending and deficit. Most importantly, we need to ensure that our men and women in uniform continue to receive their well-earned pay while we undertake the work of balancing America's books, and they undertake the vital work of defending our nation both here at home and abroad. In that regard, I'm proud to be one of the sponsors of a bill introduced by Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson that will make sure that that happens even after the work of the 111th Congress is finished. I'm also pleased to report that we are now up to 74 co-sponsors. But in the final analysis, we need to reduce our overall spending, which Americans recognize is necessary. Necessary because every day we delay, we are spending ourselves $4 billion deeper into debt. Right now, this fiscal year, we are on a path to spend $3.7 trillion, but we're taking in only $2.2 trillion in revenue, leaving a deficit of more than $1.5 trillion. To make up for that shortfall, the federal government is borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend, with a national debt of more than $14 trillion. Our largest lender is China, which now holds more than $1 trillion in American bonds. No American family would practice that kind of fiscal management, and neither should our country. Reducing our debt and deficit is something the American people understand and support, because the American people are the ones suffering the impacts. Nearly 14 million of our countrymen and women are out of work, and another 8 million are underemployed because they've had their hours cut back, or they can't afford, or they can't find a full-time job. Sadly, 1 million more have just stopped looking. As private investment has plummeted, unemployment has climbed sharply to levels that we haven't seen in decades. And for those who are fortunate enough to be working, the American dream is getting more and more difficult to achieve. In response to growing inflationary pressure, the Federal Reserve Bank now says that interest rates are likely to rise at the end of the year to tighten our money supply. Every % increase in interest rates adds $140 billion to our debt. Higher interest rates will erode the income of every American and make it harder to buy a home, a car, or a college education. Spending more won't help them. In fact, spending more will just prolong the problem. In the 1990s, when government spending as a share of GDP shrank, employment grew. And despite the surge in government spending over the past 2 years, unemployment still hovers stubbornly at about 9%. We don't need more public spending. What we need is more private investment. When private investment grows, unemployment shrinks. The American people understand all of this, and that's why they want us to arrive at a plan that keeps our government running, that respects the sacrifices of our military in real terms and puts us back on the road to fiscal health. We owe it to these hard-working men and women to bring the 2011 budget to a reasonable and realistic conclusion, and then move on to the important matters that still lie before us, including the 2012 budget. That's where we can address all of the substantive and urgent issues that we must resolve to get America's financial house in order. Issues like making sure that we have a prudent level of spending, reforming our tax code, and making entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare solvent and more secure for our seniors, both now and long into the future. Mr. President, we owe that not just to our current constituents, but to future generations of Americans. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I came over here at this very precarious moment of hours away from a possible shutdown to basically say there's absolutely no reason to shut this government down. Absolutely no reason. Why? Because both sides agree that we need to cut the budget. Both sides agree that we need to reduce the deficit. Now, when the debate got started, the Republicans put out a number, and guess what? We came to their number. We came all the way to their number. Then they said, whoops, no, we don't like that number. We're going to go to a bigger number. And we said, well, we're worried because, as my friend from North Dakota said, we care about job creation, and Mark Zandi, the key economic advisor to John McCain's campaign, said, if you do what the Republicans want to do, that's the Republicans of the House on H.R. 1, that'll cost 700,000 jobs. Can you believe that? After we're finally coming out of this recession, thank the Lord God, we had 250,000 new jobs last month. And here they are going to take a meat axe to this budget and, according to outside experts, going to destroy the economic recovery and set us right back into a recession. So we said, well, hold off here. We really feel we need to be wise about this. We went to your number that you originally put out there. Why do you keep moving the goalpost? They said, well, it's just the way it is. We moved the goalpost. Take it or leave it. We said, all right, we're going to go back and we're going to go as far in your direction as we possibly can do and not jeopardize jobs. Went back, and here's where we are. We went 78% of the way, Mr. President, to the Republicans' new number. Now, here's the deal. I want the American people to be the judge on this. There was an election in 2010. The Republicans won big in the House, and they took it over. So they run the House. The Democrats retained control of the United States Senate. I know very much about it because I was one of those seats that was being watched. And we kept control of the United States Senate. And, of course, the President is a Democrat, and he's there for a couple of years, and, of course, some of us hope for a lot longer. But here's the deal. Out of the three parties to the negotiation, Republicans control 1/3 of the government and Democrats 2/3. We didn't look at our Republican friends and say, well, we control much more than you do, so we'll only go 1/3 of the way to you. We were willing to give and give and give and to look at expenditures that we believe are key. And we said we're willing to give some of this up. And we marched over to their side 78% of the way. So if I stopped someone in the street, just a person who maybe didn't have much experience about Beltway politics, and I said, if you were negotiating with two of your friends and they saw something their way and you saw it your way, and they came 78% of the way to what you wanted, what would you do? And I think the average person would say, Hooray, let's get this done. Well, that's what I say tonight. Let's get this done. There is no reason to shut down the federal government when we have come, the Democrats have come, by way of cuts, 78% of the way to our Republican friends. But let me tell you the bad news. It turns out this isn't what the fight's about at all. At the 11th hour, our Republican friends are holding this country hostage to an agenda which is about cutting women's health care. Now, you may say, could you say that again, Senator Boxer? What? Yes. This debate over the budget, where we've come 78% of the way and made painful cuts, is not about budget cutting. It's about women's health. And let me tell you specifically what it's about. It's about a women's health care program known as Title X. And I'm sure people are saying, what is that? Very simple. In 1970, a Republican president named Richard Nixon signed this bill. And you know who voted for it in the House? President George Herbert Walker Bush. We are talking about a bipartisan bill to give women the health care they need. And the Republicans today have moved so far away from their own legacy, from their own history, that they're off the charts on extreme land somewhere. Now, let me say, I want to hear one reason why a woman who uses these Title X clinics as their first line of health, and by the way, millions of women do, and men, because they get help for high blood pressure, diabetes checks, they get help for breast cancer screening, they get help for pelvic exams, they get help for sexually transmitted diseases, HIV/AIDS testing, referral for additional medical screening and diagnostic testing, blood pressure screening, smoking cessation, cholesterol screening, infertility counseling, and, if asked for, birth control, which, when it's counseled in the right way, birth control will prevent unwanted pregnancies and therefore bring down the number of abortions. Somebody explain to me how our country is better off when our American families are shut out of health care. Health care that is so cost-effective that for every dollar, Mr. President, that is spent through the Title X health care program, which goes to local clinics, 75% of the funding does not go to Planned Parenthood. Could we be clear here? Planned Parenthood gets 25% and does a fabulous job. But the fact of the matter is, not one penny could ever be used for abortion, or people could go to jail. There's no money in here for abortion, period, end of quote. It's the Hyde Amendment. I know this because I was in the House of Representatives when we said about the Hyde Amendment there ought to be an exception for rape, incest. Okay? So I personally know the Hyde Amendment is the law of the land. So if anyone tells you they're closing down because of abortion, it has nothing to do with abortion. It has to do with mainstream health care for women and their families. So here we are. We've come 78% of the way to them on cuts, and by the way, they announced last night that was it. We agreed that was fine. But now we don't have an agreement. Mr. President, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that I pause here to make a request and then go back and not be interrupted in my words, and ask if I could have an additional 5 minutes beyond the 10.
Without objection, the senator shall have an additional 5 minutes, and the matter that she will now insert in the record will not interrupt her statement.
Well, Mr. President, you are really very helpful. I ask unanimous consent that the period for morning business for debate only be extended till 8 p.m., with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, with the majority leader to be recognized at 8 p.m.
Without objection, it will be so.
Thank you. Now, Mr. President, I have my fingers crossed that at 8 o'clock the majority leader will say that we have overcome our problems, that he will say that we go back to agreeing on the number that was agreed to last night. It's well above $70 billion. Remember, cutting that out in just the next 5 months or so is a big bite. But we all know we have to reduce the deficit, but I hope our Republican friends have backed off of this, backed off of them completely shutting down, eliminating a women's health care program used by their families and them, 5 million of them, cost-effective, $4 of benefit for every dollar invested, 4,500 clinics, 75% of them non-Planned Parenthood, 25% of them Planned Parenthood, none used for abortion, all used for health care. And I hope they will back off and say, you know what, we've reflected on this. We've read this. We know the health care our people are getting at home. We checked it out. We called our district, we called our state, and we decided to come off of this crazy idea. And we will stand with Richard Nixon, and we will stand with George Herbert Walker Bush, who supported Title X. To me, I can't imagine how our Republican friends would rather shut down the government than to continue this health care program. I can't imagine why they would rather take away paychecks from our hardworking men and women in uniform and others who are cleaning up Superfund sites, who are working to deliver veterans benefits, who are working to keep our parks open, why they would take away paychecks from those people because they don't want to continue breast cancer screenings to women. And speaking of paychecks, you have to know that the Senate passed unanimously a bill that said if we fail to keep the government open, we don't get paid. Because guess what, Mr. President? Members of Congress get paid by a special statute where everybody else doesn't get their paycheck. We get our paycheck. We sent this over to Boehner, Speaker Boehner. You know what happened to it? I don't know what happened to it. I don't know what happened to it. It would take him 2 minutes right now. So if he's watching this, I guess he's not, but if he would be, I would say just take 5 minutes and go to your Rules Committee and bring this bill up and just let America know that you, Mr. Boehner, and your colleagues who are ready to shut this government down will not get a paycheck. I am so tired of the hypocrisy I see around this place. I really am. One of the congressmen over there was complaining about, he said, I don't make enough. $174,000. He doesn't make enough. I cry for him. But I have to say this. Where are his tears for his staffers? Where are his tears for the military who aren't going to get paid? Where are his tears for the people cleaning up Superfund sites? Where are his tears for the guide out here on the mall? This is the biggest day for our national parks, the biggest week, the biggest month. In April, 800,000 people come from all over the world to America to go to our national parks, many for this Cherry Blossom Festival. Some people already may be here for that. Kids, families. The hotels are booked. The restaurants are booked. Where is this congressman's tears for the people whose families' vacation were destroyed? Maybe they can't get back their airfare. Maybe the restaurants here lose money that week. The hotels. In my state, Yosemite National Park. If you go there, you'll be transformed into another world, another place. I tell you, the first time I ever stepped out there, in that valley, my heart almost stopped from the beauty, what God has given us. And that experience could be shut down in this shutdown. And I'm not making a choice between Yosemite and the 46 clinics in the Central Valley who get Title X funding. 46 clinics, Mr. President, that see hundreds and hundreds of patients in need of health care. I am not going to choose. I am going to say, keep this government open. What's your problem with women? What's your problem with giving women the health they deserve? What happened in your life that you don't understand that a woman who gets an early breast cancer screening can have her life saved? What's wrong with you over there? A pap smear. I'm sure if it's your daughter, if it's your wife, oh my God, you would do anything to get them to the doctor to make sure that they were healthy. Where is your voice for 5 million women? I gotta say, I'm baffled at this one. This isn't about abortion. I already said, not $1 goes to it. I gotta say, the Republicans would rather close all of our national parks, they'd rather suspend tax refunds for hardworking Americans than give cervical cancer screenings to women and provide HIV and STD testing to men and women. You know, they're going to close the Small Business Administration, and that hurts our small businesses, and that hurts jobs. They're going to close down the mortgage, the FHA, that backs 80% of the mortgages. So if you're finally coming out of this mess and you've bought a house, 80% of mortgages are backed by them, you are stuck in your tracks. And if you're trying to sell a house and you thought you had it done, you could put it off. I have to say, to do this at any time is ridiculous. But to do this because you don't want women to get health care is a sin. To do this at the time of 3 wars makes no sense at all. Food and drug inspections. Food and drug inspections. We know what happens when, particularly our kids, get sick because there's some kind of foodborne illness. No more inspections. Close down. So I am saying once again, to sum it up in the best way I can, yes, no question, we had an election and the Republicans won the House. And there are 3 parties to this agreement. Senate, controlled by Democrats, the White House, controlled by a Democrat, and a Republican House. So the Republicans control 1/3 of the government that's making this decision. We have come 78% their way because we know we have to make painful cuts. We're mindful of that. We are not standing in our corner with our blankie and our teddy bear with our finger in our mouth saying, please, leave us alone. We're willing. We're willing to go their way. And they have not, well, they have moved the other way. In other words, we met their number, and then they made a new number. We met that number, then they made a new number. And now we're 78% of the new number. Please, we don't have to shut down this government. What a waste. What a ridiculous waste. In my state, I would urge my Republican friends who want to shut down the Title X Women's Health Program. Call St. John's Well Child and Family Center in Los Angeles. Find out about their work. Find out about the good work they do for the people there. Call our Savior Center in El Monte, California. They receive Title X funds too. Find out about the work that they do. Call the Good Samaritan Family Resources Center in San Francisco. Find out about the good work they do with Title X funding. Think about your legacy as a Republican. Richard Nixon signing this proudly. George H.W. Bush voting for it in the House. This is a bipartisan women's health care program. There is no need to shut down the government because you want to stop funding a program that helps our people, that is cost effective, that stops the spread of disease. How they could do this is beyond me. And I ask the people of America who may be watching this debate and hear, it's time now. There's a few hours. Let's flood Speaker Boehner's phones. Let's email all the leadership, Democratic and Republican, and say, okay, it's time to end this standoff. The last thing I want to bring up is this. I've been in politics a long time. I love public service. It's in my bones. And I watch sometimes what I call an overreach. And it sometimes happens by Republicans and it sometimes happens by Democrats. And what I am seeing across this country is an overreach by the far right of the Republican Party, which is driving the Republican Party agenda. We saw it in Wisconsin. There you had a governor who came to the microphone with tremendous support, newly elected, and he said, we have a budget problem, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And everyone nodded and said yes. And he said, these unions that represent the workers here, they better come to the table. Because if they don't, I'm going to have to just take some steps to reduce their salaries and all the rest. And the union said, okay, we'll come to the table. The unions came to the table. And guess what they said? We'll give up on every dollar that you've asked us to do. And the governor said, really? Really? And then he said, fine, I'll make those cuts and I'm taking away all your bargaining rights forever. That was an overreach. What we are doing here, we are responding to the Republicans who said, we've got a deficit problem, and we need your help. And we said yes. And we came to the table, and we met them at their number. And then they increased their number. And we said, okay, we'll come a little more. As of last night, we came 78% of the way. They agreed last night, and now it turns out, just like in Wisconsin, it wasn't about the numbers. It was about some kind of vendetta that would throw women under the bus. And I am here to say on this floor that that isn't going to happen. There isn't one Democrat in our Democratic caucus, male or female, from one side of our party to the other, and believe me, we have a big range of philosophies. Not one of them is willing to say that this program ought to go, because they know it's saving women's lives. And as Harry Reid, our leader, said today at a press conference, you know, someday I may not be around to help my kids and my grandkids. I'm not going to be here forever to help them. And what if things go wrong and they have to go to a clinic? And they have to get that mammogram. There's only one clinic that does it, though. That's the one in Texas. But they have screenings. What if you have to go have that pap smear? What if you need that referral for further testing? What if you need to get help because you have diabetes and you don't have health insurance and you go to that clinic and they help you? And Harry Reid said, we're here today, not only about today but about tomorrow. And here is a program that has lasted since 1970. Count the decades, folks. And we are not going to end a program that has its roots in bipartisanship, that has its roots in caring about our fellow human beings, because it isn't necessary. A budget is about a budget is about a budget. It isn't about somebody's political vendetta. And I thank you very, very much, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to proceed for 12 minutes as if we were morning business.
Without objection.
I thank you, Mr. President. Well, still at this late date, I want to remain optimistic that we'll reach a final deal on federal spending and the government shutdown. At least the dueling press conferences are continuing as I speak. The speeches, although not many now, have been made. I hope that the negotiations are continuing by someone, somewhere. Hope springs eternal. Under the banner of hope and change, I would hope that the majority leader would change his mind. And at the very least, bring the House-passed measure to the floor for a vote. If we can't find some agreement, at least we could vote on that. That would fund the military through the end of the fiscal year and avert a shutdown in terms of 2008 spending levels and make a reduction, a significant reduction in spending. Kansans are now calling my office. I just left my office. Our staff is working there full-time. They have been all day, all week, all year. The message from their fellow Kansans is clear. It's time to stop spending money that we don't have. The House-passed measure is but a small step in this direction and would keep the government from shutting down, a goal I think everybody would like to see happen. Let's clarify the facts. The national debt is over $14 trillion and is growing daily. Some now say $14.6 trillion. We are fast approaching the debt ceiling and another very serious decision. I know the majority leadership remembers the last time that the debt ceiling was raised. It was 4 times in the last 2 years. And by the way, we spent, the editorial the majority spent twice as much in 2 years as was spent in the last 4 years of the previous administration. Now, if this continues, and this is important for folks to remember, if this continues, then by the year 2014, interest payments on the debt alone will be greater than all discretionary spending outside of the military or defense. The debate or fuss about which programs must not be cut will not be debated on the floor of this distinguished body because they will all be cut. There won't be any money. The money will go to pay interest on the debt. What an unusual situation. During March Madness, we will not see groups come in time and time and time again saying they know that we have to cut spending, but their program is different. And many times it is, and that they certainly merit our attention because they will know then, perhaps, that all the money will go simply to pay the interest on the debt. They won't have any money in the discretionary account. The House of Representatives is doing what its majority pledged to do, what it was elected to do, what they think it was elected to do, reduce Washington spending. As a logical consequence, no surprise, shouldn't be any surprise to any member of the majority in this body or the minority in the other, the House passed a bill to bring the government spending back down to 2008 levels. That's what they said they would do, and that's what they're doing. In March, the majority in this chamber rejected these modest cuts in spending, and we've been operating under a series of short-term continuing resolutions ever since. I think all of us on either side of the aisle know that government by CR, that's the acronym for continuing resolution, that's no way to govern. The leadership of the previous Congress failed to pass a budget last year, failed to pass even a single appropriation bill. We are still dealing with that abdication of responsibility. But we are where we are. The House passed another measure to keep the federal government open for another week, fund our military men and women and their families for the next 6 months, and cut government spending by $12 billion while we negotiate a long-term solution. Hopefully, well, we could continue to negotiate a long-term solution. I know tempers are frayed, and I think perhaps a weekend off it would be a good thing, but hopefully that would occur. Now, the thing that is bothersome is that the leadership refuses to bring this measure to a vote. They have the votes to defeat it, but they also refuse to put forth an alternative proposal to cut spending. It's one thing to blame the majority in the other body and say that their proposal is simply that they just can't support it. If that's the case, bring it to the floor, let's vote on it, and let's see what kind of an alternative that the leadership here would offer. Well, the media is referring to this impasse as a shutdown of the federal government. But we need to be careful before we call this a government shutdown. The people of Kansas and all of America are rightly outraged that funding for our troops and their families is at risk, that funding for most customer service support at the VA is at risk, and that funding for a wide range of economic development, agriculture programs, other programs are at risk. But that is not true with regard to one segment of our government. Just as the Army sings, as these caissons keep rolling along, so does the perpetual motion machine of federal regulations. The federal regulation machine is such that even the government shutdown can't stop it. Earlier this week, I came to the floor to talk about the concerns I'm hearing from our community bankers in Kansas. According to a summary of the Dodd-Frank Act by Davis Polk, the Act mandates that 11 different agencies created at least 243 more regulations, issue 67 one-time reports or studies, and 22 new periodic reports. Financial regulators have already issued more than 1,400 pages of regulatory proposals. 5,000 pages of regulations are expected. These actions will create additional and significant compliance costs that will impact the ability of every bank to serve its community. And they come on top of the existing regulations, including 1,700 pages of consumer regulations and hundreds of pages of regulations regarding lending practices and operations that banks are already required to comply with, and they do, in good faith. Now, some folks might think, and naturally so, that if the government is shut down, regulators won't be on the job either. I had one very interested gentleman who spoke to me in short, jerky sentences indicating that if the government was shut down, at least maybe some of the regulations wouldn't be issued that he had to put up with. Wrong. Apparently nothing, absolutely nothing, can or will stop regulators from regulating. In the case of some financial regulators, agencies not funded by taxpayer dollars, they'll be on the job, and we can anticipate that the burdensome regulations will continue. Well, what about implementing the costly and controversial health care reform bill? Will a government shutdown slow this hugely unpopular program chock full of regulations? Well, the answer, of course, is no. And the Secretary's contingency plans for HHS under a list of what will remain open during this shutdown, she believes that operations of the Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight, it's a mouthful, Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight, the regulating agency under which the Department of Health and Human Services works to issue regulations to implement health care reform, could continue as funding was provided through the Affordable Care Act. Well, this is just another example of full steam ahead with Obamacare, just like during the health care reform debate, the regulatory overreach that has become a hallmark of this administration and is not stopped by even a shutdown of the federal government. For example, regulations like the one issued just recently, days ago, by the Department of Health and Human Services on something called accountable care organizations, also known as ACOs. ACOs used to be HMOs. Didn't like HMOs too much, so we have something like HMOs, but now we call them ACOs. ACOs turned 6 pages of Obamacare into 429 pages of regulations, 429 pages in just one regulation. These new regulations empower Dr. Berwick, man in charge, and CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, to make decisions about how medical care will be delivered in this country. So, a government shutdown or not, under a cowering business community, the incredible federal regulation machine goes on like a giant creature from a video game, belching fire, smoke, fines, and regulations. Nothing, not even a shutdown of the federal government, can slay the regulating dragon. Mr. President, this debate should not be about party politics, shouldn't even be about regulation, except I discovered the regulation is going on despite the government shutdown, which I think is most unusual, to say the least. This is really about reducing spending and finally trying to tighten our federal belt. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. I said by 2014, all discretionary funds will be paid off to the national or to the interest of the national debt. The House has now passed a bill to keep our military families whole and the government running 2008 levels while we try to work out a long-term solution. A federal shutdown does not benefit anyone except regulators who, under a shutdown, will continue to regulate now unchecked. I urge the majority leader to at least bring the House-passed bill to the floor for a vote. I thank all the people who worked so terribly hard on the negotiations. I hope they're successful, even though tempest is fugiting. Time is running out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Senator from Maryland.